It's hacking time.
It's hacking time. So why did I choose that as my flavor video this week? Let me give you a hint. We got hackers this week. Coming up on OT Exposed Raw. What's up, everybody? We're back again this week with another episode of OT Exposed Raw. That's right. We got hackers. And that was the film. That was the YouTube sensation film. I believe it came out in 2015, but it's a retro film that takes place in 1985 called Kung Fury. So why did I choose it? Well, let's bring Pascal in and talk about it a little bit, our co-host.
Hey. Yeah,
I figured you would like that.
That was dear to my heart. So
yeah,
a little insight on my team's internal team's picture is the Hacker Man, and my nickname, my underground name is Hacker Man. And
underground name, as in when you die and get buried. You mean your underground hacker name?
I die and
your
get
handle
every night. Then apparently.
Every time you have to quit work and don't get to see me, you lose a little piece of yourself, don't you?
I can't. I should not leave. We should just work 24/7 and keep on the lights and keep on hacking.
There's no other way to work. All right, so let's get into it. Let's
hold on. So, I just wanted to express how excited I am. You know, over the last 10+ years of studying and evolving in cybersecurity, industrial cybersecurity even, there's been a few books that have led my my experience and my studies. And right now, today, I'm a co-host on a podcast. Do we call it podcast? Anyway, I'm a co-host.
Whatever it is, it's a cast. It's a cast.
Where two of my favorite authors are on. So I'm beyond excited here.
Oh, when do we get the fourth person?
Huh? No, the three. You and our guest. You want to announce him?
Oh, yeah. So our special guest needs no introduction, because the reason why we had the whole Hacker Man thing is because between you being Hacker Man and me being one of the authors on Hacking Exposed ICS, now we have another author, our fellow OT cybersecurity, another legend, needs no introduction, SCADAHacker, Joel Langill. Oh, that's wrong.
There we go.
I screwed up your intro. Sorry. I'm so conceited. I brought myself in mainframe. I'm sorry.
That's what happens when you try to produce and direct. Hey, that was a very nice introduction, Clint. It's a little probably overstated, but it's great to be here with you and Pascal today. It's a nice Friday afternoon. No tornadoes up here in Northeast Wisconsin today, so I'm pretty happy.
You know, hey, number one, glad to have you. Number two, I'm going to just put this out there that I have no guarantees this week that the stream is going to stay unbroken, because we have thunderstorms outside right now. And while I do have a pretty good UPS and backup here, if my router goes out, there's nothing I can do about it. So I don't know, maybe get my phone plan from like my hotspot backup or something. So anyway, so And one of the things that I definitely want to give you a chance to shout out about at the end of the show, we'll talk a little bit about your new venture that you have going on. But we want to first get the audience what they're waiting for, which is to hear us rant about the news and rant about all the goings on and all that good stuff. So, there's a lot going on over the last week or two. There's a lot we want to talk about, and I don't think we're going to get to everything again. But
if we make it through the first two, but let's try.
Yeah. So, the first thing, and before we get into the more serious one, I want to get a little bit into the Accenture story, and I'm not going to put up the link or anything, whatever. A lot of times I have my links. I'm not going to put up a link or anything like that. But suffice it to say is Accenture was recently hit with a ransomware attack. It was suspected and it was reported. I don't even know if it's true. It was reported to be an insider attack. But this is pretty big news because they're a cybersecurity big consulting firm playing in ICS. They bought Cymation to get into the OT. I hate the word OT, but ICS cybersecurity game. So, what's your take on that, you guys?
I'll leave it to Joel first.
Well, first of all, I feel bad for him because it's pretty clear this could happen to anybody. And the fact that it happened to somebody that is mature and is instilled in very rigorous internal procedures and processes, it just goes to show you it can happen to anybody. Now, what always hurts in these kind of breaches is the real kind of protection of the true TTP, how it got in, where it was, how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. I think everybody listening knows ransomware is serious, and it's probably not what I would consider as one of the more advanced methods, because once you get in and you get somebody to do something they shouldn't, we always have been trying to teach the same core set of controls. And it's funny because as I start to put together a game plan for some of the messaging for 2021 and into 2022, I go back to documents that were released right around the 9/11 era, right? So that's really when government and everybody jumped in, and all of a sudden cybersecurity became the forefront. And there were some core ideologies that were introduced in like 2003, with one of these reports being from GAO, which talked about, why control systems are such at risk. And it gave like 5 recommendations. Today, those same 5 recommendations still apply. And by the fact that ransomware is actually succeeding, meaning it's infecting and replicating enough to cause damage and harm to an organization, leads me to believe, and again, I have no firsthand knowledge of Accenture nor several other ones that we'll probably talk about, but when you see such widespread impact, it leads me to believe that they're not following some of the, and swear to God, it was 5 things we should be doing to help eliminate the risk presented by these external threats. Over.
Yeah, the only reason I bring it up is because, like I said, it was primarily an enterprise IT network attack, and the only reason I really bring it up was because Accenture is a player in ICS and OT cybersecurity, and I know a lot of people there that are people that we hang out with at all the conferences, drink beer ISAC with. And so, yeah, I feel for them, and it's kind of peculiar, and there was a lot of news about it, and I don't want to spend a lot of time banging on this one too much because, but I just kind of wanted to see if there's anything interesting. I wanted to see if there's any relevant news to ICS out there regarding this, and I don't think, there was a rumor that it was an insider attack, but I don't think that was substantiated. The good news is Accenture did, recover quickly, and it doesn't look like that there was anything, yet major that came out of this. But one thing that I would like to point out was that they immediately threatened and started dumping data, which means I don't really ever think they expected or wanted Accenture to pay the ransom in the first place. I think that it was set up to be basically a hit job, if you will.
But they
You know-
gave him like 24 hours to
Yeah.
respond. That's not enough time for a big company to get the funds together. So I don't think there was ever a question that they were gonna be playful and play nice. So
Yeah.
I would say that. And the story's still developing. I think most of the data or most of the details behind this are probably never gonna get known. What I do find interesting is that they used an insider. If that's true, then they were probably desperate to get something in there. They tried the outside, they tried the inside, they tried vulnerabilities, and they finally came to the insider threat. Kudos for Accenture to initially say and firm saying no, we're not going to pay the ransom. Kudos for that. Apart from that, I don't think we can speculate or say too much about it because there's just no details other than what we know so far.
Hey, so one thing, Pascal, I kind of like to always talk about is when I think insider, I think in terms of somebody that either is a true insider or somebody who was able from the outside to masquerade as an insider. And the reason I always come back to this, one of my favorite campaigns to study and do research on was Night Dragon back in 2011, 2012. It was well known, it was initiated by actors in China. But the first thing they did once they gained their initial foothold on public facing assets was to then assume the identity of authenticated and valid insiders. And that's why when I go back, and that's why I kind of started off with these core set of controls. That's why today the area within, and I'm going to say the US generated best practices and guidances, still fails to deal adequately with post-compromise events. So everybody, I'm sure we've got numerous listeners that's done security assessments. The one thing I always like to do and have my teams do is to measure the number of controls that are dealing with preventative measures versus those that are also dealing with detective measures, containment measures, and remediation measures. And what happens is we find out that most people, once they establish the initial foothold, there's very little security controls in place that prevents them from moving and exfiltrating information.
Yep.
And that's what's kind of shocking when you say they started dumping the data so fast. That means that they had what would appear to be poor DLP and real poor egress monitoring on the data streams that would be allowed from assets containing high value information, right? So it's kind of a little odd. And again, I don't think we'll ever know the details, but I always get concerned if assets contain that kind of valuable information, why the directional controls weren't in place at the application level as well as the physical level to ever prevent that information from working its way out of the enterprise.
And we're not talking about a few documents either. If the stories are right, we're talking 6 terabytes. That's in the news. 6 terabytes of data was stolen, according to the ransomware gang. So take it with a grain of salt. But still, you're right.
It was 6 terabytes because it was all Beer ISEC videos. So,
ring.
All right, so let's without any real data, anything else is going to be speculation. So let's move on to something a little more relevant in ICS. And so it's funny that this should not really be that big of a story because it's been a thing for a while. But I made a post on LinkedIn that got over 5,000 views in less than 2 days, tons of fallout from it, and it just became a big thing. And so, and I think that we're all passionate about this. So let's discuss it, which is, so CISA made their announcement that they are offering free cyber hygiene services or cybersecurity services in the form of assessments, et cetera. And while they've been doing this for quite some time, back in the day as ICS cert and, flyaway teams and all that, I think one of the tenets that some people have heartburn over is the fact that by offering these free services, they're potentially undercutting private businesses. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of opinions. Let's discuss kind of what your thoughts are on CISA offering the cyber hygiene services for free in the industry.
Where
Well,
do we
Pascal,
start?
why don't you start that one? Then
I'm just wondering when a government entity comes out and does this for free, what are the consequences when they do find something, right? Are they gonna mandate you address this? Is it going to be used against you somehow? Or just like I will not touch that free software from NSA, Hydra for reverse engineering. Same with this. Why use a free service from some entity that could potentially be coming back to hunt you?
Well, I think that just to guide this a little in the right direction is that I think that number one, and I don't know the laws on this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but government is not supposed to compete with private industry in certain areas. And now, of course, maybe current circumstances have overridden that now, but I think that I know, Joel, you've got some opinions on this.
Who, me?
Okay, I'm just gonna start drinking now.
Yeah, let's put some history in this. So that organization that exists today is just about a little over 10 years old, right? They were non-existent and really a bunch of very green individuals back when it was launched publicly in 2010-ish, when everybody became aware of them. Though they did do some pretty awesome research when they did their evaluation of control systems over a period of time, like around 2008, where they did a lot of advanced research on system configuration vulnerabilities and so on. So we look at the organization today, and it's interesting that people, we all know it. The news outlets read one paragraph of a story, and then they try to extrapolate and start to shape the way it's viewed. So for years, ICS CERT/CISA would always give their annual assessment report metrics. Well, if you actually read the thing, those assessments were based purely on data collected doing CSET style assessments, which I call a theoretical assessment. It's completely hands-off. It's all based on what somebody says or what you can visually validate. So now let's look, and again, I'm not quite sure how this is going to provide a true value to a customer. So I think we all agreed on the LinkedIn chat. It's probably going to benefit small business, right? So we're going straight after the SMBs. That's great. Where I'm really a little bit concerned is the one thing that DHS/CISA has held pretty firm for a long time is they never really give you actionable corrective measures. It's always general. Prevent access to the internet, deploy firewalls and unidirectional gateways, but they never actually say that you should probably do this, that, or the other. So I am curious what kind of assessment they're providing. If it's a true physical security assessment, it should include not only discovering and quantifying the threats, but also converting those into real risk as it applies to each individual entity.
Yeah, and I don't think it was internal. I think they were saying, I think it's only external network penetration testing, quote unquote pen testing. It's probably very CSET heavy, as a lot of people alluded to.
Because I think that the true value to a customer, that's not that good, because you're really not seeing the exact. So let's take a system. Let's take, an Emerson Delta V system, or a Honeywell Experian, or a Siemens PCS7. Those single systems in their architecture are deployed across dozens of different industry sectors. And the risk that each one of those sectors faces is very different, especially when you overlay it with geographical risks as well. So, I'm kind of wondering how people that really don't come from industry can quantify operational risk, which I think we all agree, this is what it's about. It's not about malware encrypting a host. It's about malware encrypting a host that's vital to keeping our manufacturing functions running. which means it has to be very specific assets, not generic. And,
Right.
we saw that with the Eternal Blue, and there was enormous indirect consequences of Eternal Blue that had to do with whether you were using Intel or AMD chips, and on and on and on, that caused this to be very complicated. So if IT comes in and says patch, well, you can't necessarily patch, because if you had AMD and you were running this version of particular anti-malware software, so on and so forth, you would crash, right?
Right.
So, and not name a lot of names and all that. So that's I'm trying to understand what customer would want somebody to tell them what's wrong.
Yeah, see, here's what
that tells me what I can do to fix it. And that's where I believe that DHS is never going to be able to provide that service, because they really do need to say, based on your architecture and your operational needs, you probably need to choose from one or two of the products on the market that address the risk and the mitigation associated with you. And that means a consultant that can say brand A may appear to be the same as brand B, C, and D, but in your particular instance, it's going to be better than the others. And that's what makes it very interesting to see and actually find some people that use this service over.
On the chat, one of the comments that I agreed with an asterisk is what you said, which is small businesses that can't afford more comprehensive assessments from top commercial organizations or any commercial organization. They're the ones that are going to benefit from CISA providing these free assessments. But here's my asterisk. Here's my caveat. If they can't afford assessments in the first place, how are they going to afford any follow-up remediation or mitigation or any more? If it's a starting point, it's a good place to start. If they can't afford the assessment, what are they going to do beyond that?
So if I can add in there a little bit, where I can see this become handy is if the average Joe, if the maintenance manager in a site wants to get a little bit of leverage to take to his upper management, he brings in an entity like CISA, right? And they come in and they say, "Oh, your stuff is crap. You need to do something right now." He can take that to his upper management and maybe help him get them on the right track. That's where I can see this being helpful.
Yeah, maybe it's a budget grab exercise. Maybe I agree. Maybe that's a good. Once you have a government entity, once you have CISA come in and say, "Hey,
yep,
your shit's messed up. Let's do something about it," then maybe C-level listens. Maybe that's it. Then it helps win-win.
Yeah, but we've all been there, right? Where you have the best intentioned employees that are sitting lower on the management level. They have a plan, they have a maintenance crew or whatever, and they're concerned about implementing cybersecurity, but they can't get through because upper management can only see like Excel sheets, and they can only see the bottom line, which is budgetary. They say, why do we need to spend money on cybersecurity? Well, here, now you got an entity that's recognized in the field, whether you agree with them or not. They're recognized in the field, and they can back you up saying, yeah, maybe you should do something. We think so too.
Well, that's interesting, because that's why I get a little concerned when you see, well, we're going to come back when we talk about stuff at the end of the session on one side of this. Where I really get uncomfortable is when anybody comes in and tells you what you have to replace. Yeah. To me, that is a cop-out. That is the sign of an inexperienced consultant that doesn't understand. No matter what most people believe, the majority of manufacturing entities, so somebody that actually makes something, if you look at their operational technology assets and investment, it usually is orders of magnitude greater than any IT investment they have. So it's not, I mean, you look at a large scale distributed control system that you might see in a chemical plant or an oil refinery. Those are tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in both we'll keep it at your level 0 and level 1. So sensors, valves, up through IO, control, compute, and all of that. So we won't go to the actual physical plant. So you start looking at it and somebody says, well, you're using something that's crap and it's vulnerable to attacks, replace it. You're kind of like, okay, so it's not like we're going to go buy a $100,000 appliance or a $250,000 software subscription to some of these new next-gen advanced detection and analysis infrastructures. We need to keep our infrastructure. So I need somebody that can help me figure out how to take the risk, overlay it on what we have, make modifications as appropriate, but then move forward. And that's why it was funny, because gosh, when XP was initially falling out of support, everybody panicked. And the first thing we did, work together very closely with Eric Byers and the Tofino team to create configurations for security appliances that you could put in front of your XP assets. Ideally, you create a nice 62443 zone that would contain all these XP assets. So you only needed one security appliance, not many, to address the weaknesses that that operating system provided until you could properly plan and schedule the upgrade. Because operational upgrades are very, very complex. And there's a lot more to it than just saying our servers are going to go down Friday night at 9 a.m. and going to come back up Monday morning at 3 a.m. It doesn't tend to work that way, especially when you're in the business of making something like making electricity or making clean water or making products that go into pipelines that need to show up at gas stations. Because a lot of people,
there's a perfect segue right there.
Hold on, so, I just wanted to point out that yes, that's not the crap that I was referring to. When I say they come in and say your stuff is crap, it means that you got your team viewer directly connected to the internet, and the team viewer is installed on your Windows 7 operating system, right? I know damn well that we cannot just go in and upgrade all of our devices. Otherwise, people will do that. I totally understand that some of these systems will run 24/7 for the next 30 years. Maybe you'll get a maintenance window in 2055 or something. Yeah, but
hey, so
our audience gets
no,
it, right? Our there's a comment from our viewers. Our viewers get it.
So Clint, one of our mutual friends made a comment about S-bombs and how the government just needs to mandate this across the board. And I want to say, hold on. I was doing security work at a U.S. government asset overseas. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because this team viewer comment. I was in there doing my passive data collection activities as part of our RMF process to get this stuff certified for deployment. And sure enough, active C2 with TeamViewer servers. And you want to know where the TeamViewer servers for this part of the world happen to land? The Ukraine. So you take the documents and you show them to management and say, active command and control infrastructure with Ukraine servers. Yeah. So how are we ever going to address this? I mean, this is government assets now, not private sector assets. And when you see this, you kind of go, this is far more complicated. And unfortunately, more mandates are not going to solve this problem, because I don't know anybody that has more procedural burden than U.S. government agencies.
So what is going to solve the problem?
Common sense, good security practices. Good security practices.
And people with the right qualifications, right? People with the right qualifications that know what they're doing.
Not that easy button solution that everybody tries to sell to you. No, good people taking care of those 5. You mentioned those 5 critical controls that every ICS owner should have, and we could probably post those 5 somewhere. I think I know a few of them. But get those 5 done, and then you're a whole lot better shape than you are now.
No, absolutely. And the 5, you can probably figure them out. Restrict physical assets, right? Okay, that's a given. Without physical security, there is no cyber logical security. But then the next one on the list is to provide logical access control mechanisms that restricts network access on a need-to-know basis. So rather than configuring entire subnets that can all see each other, starting to restrict it. And that was one I had no idea. Honeywell has an incredible implementation guide for their fault-tolerant Ethernet. and it talked about using variable length subnet masking. It's a very solid practice well, now we're at layer 3, but at layer 3 to provide the ability to restrict flows between assets that don't need it. And you start to look at that. So DHS came out with, or ICS came out with their security reference architecture. I go, it's crap. It needs to be more granular. And I use an example, always one that most people can get, Active Directory domain services. There is nothing under normal operation that an ADDS node needs to initiate communications with clients or servers. The only outbound communication that it does is replication activities between other AD servers. So why do you not have access protected so that if I attack and compromise an AD server, it will not let me laterally move to its connected clients? Right. It's the most basic security control in the book, yet I have seen no one ever implement it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I agree. Network segmentation is fine, but you need lateral movement protection within each segment as well. It's not good enough.
Let's call that micro-segmentation, right? Yeah. We need to go down one more level.
So typically what I like to do is segment, be it segmenting industrial versus business, micro-segmentation, and then only have the things talk to each other. They need to talk to each other, but then also on top of that, put some monitoring that checks for the things that go out of bounds. If you know that two devices don't need to talk to each other and something is trying to do that anyway, you know there's something going on.
Absolutely. And of course, that was the start of this whole new wave of technologies, with Sophia. And look at what's happened since Sophia, right? Some of the most brilliant products that I've seen are on the street now that are doing all kinds of analytics against network flows, like what Security Matters was doing with actual packet information, packet sizing, and anomaly detection at that level, and on and on and on. Clarity and Dragos and Nozomi, all these companies, Tenable Indigy, they're all right on the mark. And it's all
And let's be clear, just so the audience knows, Sophia is the passive sniffing agent created by ICS Cert INL, not the princess that wears the purple dress that my kids watch on Disney Junior. So
I'm shocked you know that. Well, actually, I'm not shocked.
I've got kids, man. I mean, and I like me some Disney Junior too. All right, Doc McStuffins, man. All right, so one thing I wanted to talk about, because I want to reiterate the fact that one of the takeaways from this conversation right here is something that nobody out there is talking about. It's all about segmentation, and there's no micro segmentation, and that's key. And we've been professing that since the early 2000s. I mean, that's what Tofino was originally built for. So kind of basically we call it, putting little isolated bubbles around your equipment. Network bubbles. So real quick, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was another misconception that a lot of people had, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go here. We're gonna have to go back to Colonial.
Oh, that's the wrong one. That's drink.
Yeah, well, here, you know what? Boo as well. Yeah, boo
for you.
And drink. Right. All right. So we got to go back to Colonial. In that, everybody was giving them shit for shutting down or not or paying the ransom or anything like that. And I think you had a really great explanation of the way pipelines work and the reason why they shut down and different products and all that on Dale's podcast. And if you could give me a quick summary on why it was so important that they shut down because of scheduling and all that stuff like that, I think that would be beneficial to our audience. Okay, so it was
the morning all that happened, I saw the routes. I said, okay, Colonial got hit. And then, about 12 hours later, Colonial came into play. The reason
By the way, we're not going to keep the banner up, drink. We're going to let you see it
keep
gratuitously now.
So the reason is back when I was a control systems engineer responsible for the dispatching area and the gasoline blenders at Shell's Deer Park manufacturing complex outside of Houston, I worked with Colonial. And the impact that the pipeline availability has on a refinery that's putting product into the pipeline is very, very important, because if the pipeline goes down, a lot of people don't realize there's two things to look at it. We'll use refined products, the 10-second lesson. Refined products, gasoline, to most people, they think it's just something you go to a gas station, get it out, and pump it in your vehicle. The problem is that different states and even different regions within states have different requirements. So the gasoline that's made is actually made for specific target markets. So if we make a batch of gas, and one of the big providers and destinations, believe it, for the Houston refinery was actually the state of Florida. They have very different requirements, as does California and different other states with environmental regulations and so on. So we make product that fills up a tank farm in order to get it in a pipeline. But if the pipeline's not there and we don't have capacity to store it, then it starts to impact the operation of the refinery on the upside, the inlet side. Same thing happens on the outlet side, is that if there's any disturbance in the ability to take the products out, because multiple companies put products into pipelines. So there's a slug mechanism, which is just an induction of a die that can be tracked through the pipeline as the product moves. So you really can determine when Exxon's gasoline's in versus Shell's gasoline or Chevron's or ConocoPhillips.
And that's when the scheduling comes in as well,
That's
which was important with
all
Colonial.
scheduling. So you've got enormous front end and back end scheduling. And you've got the financial coordination of that. So the best example, when I was trying to think of how I could explain a pipeline to a non-oil guy or girl, was think of a bank, right? A bank doesn't really own anything. It's holding your assets and transferring assets between two parties, just like a pipeline. Okay, the pipeline owns the physical asset of the pipeline and all of the pumping stations, or if it's natural gas, the compression stations. But they don't really own anything in that pipeline. So a pipeline is really nothing more than a bank for liquid products. And that's why when I started to see what could shut this thing down, the first thing that came to mind was scheduling systems. The second thing that came to mind would be financial systems, meaning the ability to bill and get paid, right? So we need to be able to charge somebody and receive their funds. Now, Ron Brash from Adolis did a really good write-up, and I liked his research because he did hit a lot of good points. The reason I thought that it was leaning more towards scheduling was because scheduling systems, like I said, are very tightly integrated with a large number of third parties. The people that are making the products that go in one end and the people that are taking the products that go out on the other. And they're not necessarily the same. They may be, but they don't have to be. Because once gas goes into pipelines, some of it is truly a commodity, and it's bought and sold on the commodities market, and it shows up anywhere. So when we saw that, it's like scheduling made perfect sense, because when you do a standard security assessment, the first thing you do is you create these trust boundaries, and then you try to identify all your entry points. And for a scheduling system in something like a pipeline, those entry points are enormous. And that's where we kind of see that, okay, so we're back to the biggest target that we've seen in recent years is our supply chain problems, right? So income supply chain risk, supply chain vulnerabilities, and how people are ensuring enforcement of security controls on anybody that has the ability to disrupt the core, right? The central services. And that's why one thing that we developed when I was working with the government group at Amentum/AECOM was we created this sine wave that talked about risk and threats and talked about mission impact or essential services. So we don't really care about what most people worry about, which is all the vulnerability crap in the middle. That's why I have that go below the waterline. What we're interested in is a risk, a threat, and how they could actually impact what we're here trying to do, whether it's move oil, make cars, make chips that go into cars, on and on and on. And that's when we start to do these threat maps. We're focusing more on the end than the means to the end. And that again is why, we could hit back on the SIS offering services. Without manufacturing experience, how do you know what keeps a plant manager up if you don't know a lot about his business? Because it's not the same everywhere. It's really not the same.
Exactly. That's one of the things we definitely talk about a lot is that, every process or every cyber vector, every cyber attack incident into process automation is unique. That's why it's so difficult to monitor appropriately. I can't talk. I haven't even been drinking that much. Appropriately. That's why it's so difficult to assess, do forensics on it. But that's also why it's not like a lot of consultants like to believe or would like their customers to believe that, flipping bits will blow up a plant. It doesn't exactly work that way. If you want to cause something truly impactful, you have to know a little bit about that process. And so, but it's the same thing with assessing it, with protecting it. You have to know something about the process specifically in order to protect it properly. So, and one thing I wanted to point back to was in your explanation, that is why, not only why you need specific knowledge and experience to protect these systems, that is how and why ransomware can affect the OT or the process relevant systems from the enterprise network and then cause a shutdown on the process side, because a lot of those systems that impact process, the engineering side, the operations side, have counterparts on the enterprise IT network.
Well, Clint, that brings up a kind of an interesting point. And that's one thing when you start to read, especially with the major news outlets, they still have failed to differentiate between a critical infrastructure provider being hacked versus the industrial control systems within the critical infrastructure provider. Just because a CNI entity is hacked does not mean their control systems were hacked.
Right. Yep. They could have been affected, but it wasn't directly related to their process being hacked.
Correct.
Now,
and that's the case most of the time.
The level of security controls that they've implemented will help differentiate between a hack on a company becomes a hack on an ICS environment, right? If you put proper controls in place, you might survive a ransomware that spreads around across your IT if you have a proper boundary between your IT and your industrial environments.
Right.
Yep. Well, and that's why, I mean, we've responded to incidents that, the ransomware propagated due to within its own subnet, because there wasn't further lateral movement protection like microsegmentation and things. Here's a good question from one of our viewers. Asking, in your opinion, was the Colonial shutdown a panic measure and a mistake in hindsight, or did they have no choice?
In my opinion, I believe they had no choice. So, like one person said, if it was attacking the back office systems, so whether they're the financial or the scheduling, there's no way you can run that pipeline without a scheduling system functioning. And there's no way you could run the pipeline without their financial system. And people were saying, couldn't you just trust everybody? I have a hard time believing that the world banks would just trust everybody, saying if you took some money from an account, you're going to be honest and tell me how much money you took. So
can I take that back to your can I take that back to your explanation for a minute? Because if you look at the pipeline as a single pipeline, right, you have multiple customers, you have multiple suppliers, but you only have one pipeline. If you compare that to an MPLS system in IT terms, MPLS needs timing to send the right package. Well, it uses a little bit more, but it basically uses timing, and it uses scheduling to get those packets to the right customers. Am I right in believing that the pipeline works the same way? It's your scheduling that determines, okay, we're gonna pump over 30 minutes worth of gasoline to Florida, Once that's done, it's going to go to this site. So we need to do a different mixture. And that's where your scheduling comes into play.
Correct. And getting everybody to make sure that the products are ready to go in and the products are ready to go out.
Yeah. So
now what's really interesting, and in preparation for a big simulation, a live fire and tabletop exercise we did called Jack Voltaic 2 a few years back, we tracked a lot of information that was going on because we wanted to see how well we could handle a massive cyber attack launched in the coattail of something like an environmental effect like a hurricane. So we did a lot of data collection from Hurricane Harvey. And believe it or not, this exact scenario started to show up during Hurricane Harvey. And I mean, I was very loud on social media. Because the refineries had to start shutting down, the pipeline lost its source of fuel going in, which means the pipeline then had to shut down because of the environmental impact. So I told my friends, I said, there's an event that may impact the northern US, but it's going to take a few days. I suggest you keep your gas tanks full because once and sure enough, the pipeline did shut down briefly, but it wasn't long and it wasn't cyber related. So once the refineries came back up, they were able to start pushing product. But that's the thing that worries me is people are failing to see there's a lot of interdependencies between the logical world and the physical world in this case. Over.
Yeah, I think, so one of the other questions that one of our viewers had was that they were clarifying. So Colonial had no choice due to shut down due to the lack of confidence in their ICS cybersecurity. I think at that point it was beyond ICS cybersecurity. It was that the ransomware had already affected systems that affected the process itself, like we said, the scheduling. So at that point, cybersecurity wasn't their concern. It was their ability to manage that pipeline flow and the products in it and all of that stuff. It was a business decision at that point. It wasn't a cybersecurity concern. The problem had already happened.
Well, yeah, and Clint, or did you want to say something, Pascal?
I was just going to add in there that yes, I think they absolutely did not overreact. I do think this could have been prevented with a proper architecture, though, because you can defend, and this might be the CPWE person, the industrial demilitarized zone person in me, but with proper architecture, you can prevent having to shut down. If you plan your systems, if you lay them out properly, you can keep running while your IT is on fire. That's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, we could bring up a lot of those, just like Triton. Triton should have never happened if those people were following the recommended practices of the vendor, which they weren't, which is why it worked. So,
but it's money, it's timing, and I understand why it doesn't happen. I'm not blaming anybody. I understand why, but I'm just saying it is preventable if you really want to spend the resources in getting there.
But you know, one thing, and I know this is hard, you don't want to take too much time, but there are some industries that the control systems and the associated physical assets, they really do run autonomous from the business. There's not a lot of interdependencies as there are in some of the more advanced just-in-time type sectors where the business systems are really driving the manufacturing cycle, which means there's, for instance, in a refinery is a lot of pieces that come together to make a lot of different products. Somebody actually has to determine what the refinery is going to do today based on the availability of mechanical equipment, the availability of inventory, and the availability and current market on refined and finished products. So this is a very real-time infrastructure where, you know, that was the morning meeting every day, was discussing how the plant was going to run based on the economics that are going on, whether an event broke out in the Middle East or a refinery down the road had a mechanical incident that caused them to shut down. Everybody had to make adjustments, and it's all very integrated. It's more industrial control systems in those businesses are not standalone. And you would hope that it's a one-way flow, right? Or two one-ways, as our waterfall security guys would like with the flip type technology, right? They need to push recipes down or production slates down, and they need to read up manufacturing integrity, maintenance information, health status, and all that.
I use a similar example when I talk about cybersecurity with our customers, and I put on top of there. Now imagine your MES or ERP systems have ransomware on it. How long do you think you keep running before you have to make the decision to stop?
I like you using MES. I was going to use MES because, like in pharmaceutical, that is so spot on. That is the key that has to be available. And when we started to look at the pure ICS versus the pure enterprise, that MES was right in the middle. And for me to get them to understand the severity, the MES and its ability to impact their ERP, AKA, let's just say SAP, because that's what most people use, all of a sudden everybody's eyes get really big. If I can do something in the ICS that could cause an event to shut down SAP, lots of case studies on that, like Aramco, when they were implementing one of their early SAP implementations, they couldn't generate invoices. So could you imagine a company of that size not being able to ask people to pay their bills?
It goes back to like the old gas station thing. Anyway, so
are you that old? Come on, you're not that old.
Come on, you're dating yourself.
Hey man,
I have no clue what he's talking about.
I date myself every night. Wait, wrong concept. All right, listen. So we have another question, and I want you to give me the quickest answer you can because there's something I want to get to in our last 10 minutes, which we're already past. So here's a question that I think is a good question from our audience. So what about engineering workstations connected to field bus layers? What's the best way to continuously audit and confirm those PC-based systems and the equipment they're connected to? How do you make sure that they're cyber safe, right?
Well, man, that's a great question, Tom. So the way that I always, when I introduce people to the concepts and I always do assessments, to me, the two most valuable assets on any ICS architecture is whoever's doing the IAM components. So let's just say Active Directory and the engineering services. So I got to say the most impressive day of my life was going in to a pharmaceutical facility. And I'm sure there's some people out there. Every country that lets people manufacture and sell their products has some kind of a validation process to ensure the integrity of those drugs. So there's a very rigorous process that occurs to validate an architecture. So what I liked about pharmaceutical was the one most valuable target that exists on all these architectures, the engineering workstation, is not there. Because once a system has been validated, there can be no changes without revalidation. So all the tools that allowed the ability to reprogram, reflash, push updates, any of that stuff were all completely removed from the architecture. So now when we start talking about engineering workstations and their ability to attack layer one equipment, I wish our layers, layer one, I'm going to call it layer one, and layer zero. I wonder if Joe Weiss is on the call because, boy, this is his big one about going in and starting to manipulate sensors. Yes, it is important, and an engineering workstation, or depending on the technology that's used, sometimes the operator functionalities have the ability to launch methods and so on that exist in these smart devices. So the most important thing now is around managing who has access and when. And that's why the thing that was great again about Night Dragon, the attack occurred during the Chinese business day, which is the US sleeping night. So why were engineering workstations logged in, active, connected to architectures when nobody was there, right? The engineers were gone. That's very much an 8 to 5 day a week job. So protecting the assets on engineering workstations is key. And that's why you know there's two people in an organization that are the most difficult to change: the engineer and the IT administrative lead. Neither of those wants to change the way they do things. And I'm going to be very honest. I was one of those persons for a long time.
Me too.
Engineering type guy.
Yep.
We do a lot of things to make our life easy and convenient. And in some cases, making those decisions was a wrong one because it's not necessarily the safest and most secure way to do it. It may take a little more time to do things the secure way, but it also can improve the overall security of the architecture. And one example of this is the same account should not be able to create that's allowed to delete, right? And that's, again, a very fundamental practice, so that if an engineer's account would be compromised, he would be limited in his ability in what type of changes he could do. Over.
Yep.
So
let me
go
add
ahead,
on,
Pascal.
especially that last one. Like
before you go, Pascal, real quick, Pascal, before pause.
Yeah.
We are going to run over a little bit if that's okay with everybody, but this is great discussion. So we're going to run over a little bit, and I want to give Joel a little bit of time at the end of this too. So just want to let you know that this will be the last topic we cover before getting into the, all right. So go ahead.
Yeah,
Good thing about not having producers and commercials.
To fill in on the accounts, yeah, I'm a firm believer that every engineer, every user of a workstation should have a dedicated account, and that account is dedicated to that machine, and it's only to log in. You want to elevate your privileges, you need to have a dedicated admin account that's only valid on that one machine, and that's not allowed to go over the network or RDP to other systems, right? That's cyber hygiene. A lot of times, so my philosophy is minimize the attack surface, which means take your workstations onto the enterprise side and do a proper DMZ broker service to help do that stuff. So minimize the attack surface, but the ones that do have to stay below because they have a field bus and connected to them, I typically install a whitelisting application, which is a fantastic solution in the ICS because we like things that don't change on the industrial side. And a second one, I typically throw a SIM agent on there. So I get event logs pushed up to a SIM solution where I can see, hey, this person logged in overtime every Monday at 3 o'clock. And now all of a sudden he's on Sunday in the afternoon, he's on there. So I can start seeing patterns and all that stuff. That's my 2 cents.
It's worth more than 2 cents. All right. So, any final thoughts there, Joel, before we jump into the final segment?
No, I think that was, we kind of covered a lot there. The operational side, that's again why people that know me know I'm very opinionated. System knowledge is very key because not all systems can be configured in an identical manner. And like a lot of the key engineering activities are taking place by application authentication mechanisms and not platform operating system authentication mechanisms. So, when people start to look at evaluating systems, and this is a no-win battle, is to peel off the layers and go that deep to understand how a brand A, brand B, brand C system works in comparison to each other in terms of when an engineer makes a change, how is it reported? Is it reported into a local database that shows status and logging? But is that same information able to be exported and put into some larger SEM environment? Because I'm a firm believer that an event that occurs randomly every now and then may not be significant. But if that same random event occurs on multiple assets at the same time, it does become a significant event. And log aggregation is definitely one of the top controls that needs to be done. Hey, nice page there.
Yeah, so that's our segue real quick. Go ahead, Pascal, but I'm going to leave this up there.
I want a final note because I completely agree with Joel, and I just wanted to say, if because you hinted on doing not only having your operating system do the authentication and authorization, but also your ICS application, right? I'm going to say if Florida, remember the Florida water treatment breach, if they had defined their their critical set points, and if they had put a password protection on their critical passwords, that could have probably prevented the attacker from changing that set point. So yeah, it's don't just look at your Windows or your system, but also look at your application that running the ICS.
So the reason we want to segue here is because, Joel, I know that you're a big proponent of, the right people doing the right things with the right qualifications and the right skills. And one of a mutual soapbox that you and I both have is people out there doing or trying to do ICS, OT, cyber risk mitigation work, cybersecurity work, without the right qualifications, without having, getting the right experience and things like that. And so one of the ways, and you could feel free to talk about that and expand upon that. But I also wanted to point out that, what your new venture that you have, the Industrial Control System Cybersecurity Institute, and the ways that you're solving that.
Well, this is a big deal because, most people know I've been doing this since about 2011 when this was launched, SCADAHacker was launched. And training was a big deal. And always from the premise at the startup of SCADAHacker was to teach somebody skills that allow them to go back to their job and help identify and secure, not identify and complain or identify and request money, but to identify and secure. And that's why right now there's a lot of deviance going on, not deviances in people, deviations. And one of the two great threads in the past week have been Clint's and this one that I posted that talks about the ability for people to actually have a team of individuals that meets a given subset of requirements. In order to adequately understand, evaluate, identify, and mitigate risk of a system, you have to have capability on the system in the industry and know how to address risk reduction. And that's where everything around this class this whole curriculum was set up. So like if you hit the training tab and then go to the bottom, Clint.
Let me look.
The training requirements for an engineer are very different than the training requirements for a control systems operator, which are very different from the training requirements from a control systems vendor or maybe a maintenance technician who has to maintain these systems. So rather than try to have this one size fits all class that's broad, it's very wide, but very narrow in depth, this curriculum was set up to address job functions and the requirements of job functions in terms of industrial cybersecurity, because that's going to be the way that we're going to get over this. We need to teach technicians some level of cybersecurity. They don't have to be experts. They don't have to spend thousands of dollars on certifications, but they need to have a core set of skills around industrial cybersecurity. Same thing with vendors. Vendors have a self-certification entity in what they're doing with the ISA Security Compliance Institute. However, shocking that most, and I'm gonna bash the government again because of the government's massive requirements to do small and disadvantaged minority-owned businesses, you rarely see the qualifications around cybersecurity that exist in companies that the U.S. government is issuing contracts around industrial infrastructure. And that's what really concerns me. This curriculum was developed with the Department of Defense in mind and their whole supply chain issue. How we can take small businesses that may be doing control systems integration work and teaching them a core set of capabilities, as well as the support organizations. For instance, when I was in Europe, very little of that equipment was actually maintained and managed by U.S. entities. So whether they're U.S. nationals or government employees, they tended to be all done through third-party contracts. So you would look up who the contract is. It may be a well-known system like a Honeywell or a Siemens or a Bosch system. But the problem is that it wasn't those companies that were providing the service capabilities. So that's really what this whole program was about, was to not teach around a certification, but to teach around a qualification, a set of competencies and capabilities that are needed in industry today. And what's really awesome is this is going to be the second semester where the course is being taught at a university level. Texas A&M picked it up last year because of a close working relationship my former employer had with them. And we're continuing it on this fall. And I have continuing discussions with other higher level educational facilities to do the same. The class is now at a point where it's licensable, it's contained, it's modularized, so institutions could take it, they could deploy it, organizations could take it and deploy it, and start to teach these skills to a wide mass of people. And that's what I think is going to be that step change in getting people more in sync with how we're doing industrial security. You know, it's a dream. It's something, you know, I'm at the later years of my career, and this is something I feel passionately about. And that's why we're trying to get this moving. I'm hoping to bring on a couple more technical colleges, because I like the technical college route, because that tends to be more of the core keyboard people, the hands-ons. So like the technical colleges near me, Wisconsin's got a wonderful TC infrastructure. I looked at their College of Engineering Sciences and their College of Information Technology and found that this is an area that's completely left out. So they do teach control systems, techniques and technologies to the engineering sciences people, and the IT people have cyber, but there's nothing that crosses those two worlds. So this is a perfect fit. And hopefully over the next 2 semesters, we're going to start to see some very positive change. Thanks for giving me that plug there, Clint.
Here, I'll do this. I'll be the. There we go. There's the shameless plug that is I allowed. So
we're just as excited as you are about this.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's one of the reasons why we played in the training game for the curriculum, right? And for a while, and we decided to not get in the training curriculum in the live training game because, you know, once people like you started putting out really hardcore focused classes in a way that in a breadth that, you know, that we were kind of stretched thin and couldn't do. We felt like that building partnerships with organizations like yours that have the experience to do this and the focus, building those partnerships was a lot more valuable than us trying to spread ourselves too thin, you know, and then and essentially compete in that space where instead of competing, let's, you know, it's much better to all work together on this. So
the thing that's key is 2020 was a very challenging year for everybody. And, you know, live training effectively disappeared in April, right? So we had a lot of challenges. And moving things completely virtual, in my opinion, was absolutely the worst thing that could ever happen. Because the thing that makes my class very powerful is a very advanced learning management system in the back. And it's tightly integrated with the range, where we can actually take real physical industrial security equipment and bring it into the virtual world, so that a student in Singapore or a student in France or a student in Houston can all interact with this equipment without having to travel to a location or to have to spend all this money on them themselves. But I found that the retention and the learning potential on a completely unstructured virtual environment is terrible. People lose interest. I feel terrible for these grade school level kids. I mean, I see adults that lose interest very quick. I couldn't imagine, you know, people that don't have long attention spans because they're kids. So that's why I'm excited with this fall, is to now offer a structured virtual environment that has hybrid live, plus all of the stuff that you need to do over a period of time. So it's not a 40-hour boot camp, which that has its downfalls. It's not an unstructured. You can do it in 1 month or 1 year, but something that's structured. So you have tasks that have to be accomplished. You have homework assignments. You have lab exercises, quizzes, and so on. So that's going to run concurrently with the Texas A&M class this fall. So it's awesome. The enrollment at A&M is very high this year. So I'm excited, and I'm hoping to bring in some other private sector people to join in that, because we're all going to go down that same path. So one night we do lectures, and then everything's unstructured, but you have to accomplish certain activities by the next lecture. 16 weeks because of holidays around Labor Day and Thanksgiving. It ends the week before Christmas. Over.
Well, and one of the things we're excited about is, and I'm going to say this on my own behalf, we've got things we're working on at ThreadGen that will possibly help you scale your virtual environment even further. So
always like to hear that.
Well, everybody, we ran long today, but it was worth it because we had, we're going to call ourselves the OT Hacker Trio here, I think. So we'll come up with a sexier name. But for now, that's what we'll be. I think the only other person, if you want to basically take kind of the OT hackers, the actual OT hackers, we need Polay here. We need Eric Byers here. And
Stephen Hill.
Need Fabro.
And Fabro. Yeah, we need Fabro. And probably Reed Whiteman. You can't leave Reed out.
Read it. Yep, absolutely.
So Stephen Hill, but there's a whole crew.
And Ruben, got to get Ruben in from IOActive.
Yeah, there's the whole there's a whole kind of OT hacker crew that we all sit around at Beer ISAC, and I think we should actually have some sort of an OT hacker gathering at one of the Beer ISACs at S4. The next time that we actually have a live get together, we should have the OT hacker crew.
We could broadcast that on location, the whole team.
That would be interesting.
I'm up for
We
that.
could call it the old geezers getting together.
That would be interesting. So yeah. So anyway, Brian Singer, you're another one too. So I didn't even half the authors on the book back there, all part of that. Half all of them actually. But anyway, so hey, we're all authors here. We're all authors here. Anyway. Everybody, thanks for sticking with us this long. It was a long episode, but worth it. Kind of a special episode. So we will see you next week. So Joel, thanks for being with us. Joel Langill, the SCADAHacker. Thanks for being on with us. Thanks everybody, and we will see you again next week.
Stay safe.